And welcome to Woody's Weekly Wisdom, episode number 89. And we've had a budget in this part of the world, in Australia, this week. And so I felt as though you might want to know a little bit about what was in it. And spoiler alert, it was a nothing burger. But we best have a look at some of the headlines so that we can get ourselves a bit of an understanding of what has come about as a result of the budget and what that means for you. So originally this article I clicked across and it was this one here, Chalmers Budget Unlikely to Sway the RBA. So when we come across here, that headline has become Cost of Living Relief and Tax Cuts Unlikely to Sway the RBA. And so from a headline perspective, we look at this and say, well, that's great. Unlikely to sway them in which way? And I think the general consensus here is that we are on the start of a cycle of rate cuts. And so the journalist here is suggesting that the budget did nothing to change those circumstances. And there's a little bit of, there is a lot of politics in this budget, which is all designed to ensure that nothing changes the RBA's intentions when it comes to future rate cuts. So this budget was nothing about helping you or me. It was all about doing nothing to upset the population and therefore change voting intentions. And the best way to do that is do nothing that would harm the everyday Australian. However, I think you'll see that some of what they've done may not have had the intended impact when it comes to swaying people's votes. Because if we look at the main item in the budget, and I may not go through this article in a great deal of detail, but the headline budgetary item that everyone's hearing about is the tax cuts. And the tax cuts that are the lazy man tax cut, because they've basically said it's too hard to means test the tax cut or to segment the tax cut so that only those that really need it get it. And so everybody is getting the tax cut because they're doing it at the lowest level of the tax threshold rates. And they're reducing it by 1% this year and another % next year, or next financial year, 26-27. And so that's a massive $5 something for this year and $10 the year after. And I've seen a number of different speeches, articles, memes about this. And it's like, what will you spend your $5 on? What is that going to do to change your money scenario? And out riding this morning with some of my mates, and it's like, wouldn't even notice $5. And that's coming from people who are doing quite well for themselves. But for those people who need this money the most, $5 is, in my opinion, a slap in the face. However, it was done to force a political agenda rather than to actually be beneficial for anybody and their cost of living crisis. All they wanted to achieve was to put the opposition in a position where they would vote against the tax cut so they could then run on the policy idea that the opposition voted against the tax cuts. But in reality, it was a absolutely token amount that is going to change nobody's cost of living scenario at all. And so that's the big one. So then what does that mean in terms of the RBA and their rate cycles? Well, as I said, it was a nothing burger in terms of the tax cuts. That's not going to drive people to be spending lots of money. So that's not going to harm inflation. But what they did in a far more politically cynical manner was to extend and increase the energy rebate. Now, everybody knows that one of the biggest drivers of inflation over the last couple of years has been energy prices, electricity. And as a result, the government was forced to bring in a rebate to help people meet their electricity costs. And so they've gone and extended that scheme and added an extra $150 this year in 2 installments of $75. And so the reason I'm saying that's cynical is because that will flow on to this year's inflation numbers, whilst the tax cuts will take longer to flow in, and therefore we will see inflation either reduce or at least stay where it is because of this $150 rebate to the electricity costs that people are facing. So $150, not to be sneezed at, a whole lot better than $5 when it comes to your tax cuts, although obviously that is weekly. But even so, it's still very, very minor. But the $150, people are going to notice that when it comes to paying their electricity. But as I said, the more cynical approach to it is that $150 is being done entirely to ensure that the impact of rising energy costs is mitigated, so therefore inflation doesn't rise, so therefore interest rates won't necessarily rise, or more importantly, the ability for the RBA to cut rates is still available. And so these are not headlines that you'll read. You won't see this necessarily in these commentary, but it is a very, very cynical way to ensure that there is no pre-election hit on the interest rate front. Not saying anything about which party would do this, because they all do it. All political parties are all about getting re-elected and maintaining power, and a whole lot less about what that means for your future and certainly your money. So here's a breakup of the spending. Nobody really gets into that level of detail or care. Not sure why we see that every time there's a budget, because nobody really cares where all the money is being spent, because there's very little we can do about it. And that's a personal opinion. I'm sure there might be some people screaming at me right now about I do care, but there it is. There's the split. If you're into it, have a look. But ultimately, as you can see here, the budget is broadly in line with the ongoing soft landing scenario that they were looking for, and the interest rate scenario. So in that respect, the budget has delivered in that it's going to do nothing to derail, hopefully, the interest rate cycle that we hope becomes a cycle. We've only had the one cut, so it's hard to call it a cycle yet, but we're very hopeful that all the numbers we are seeing will enable the RBA to continue to cut rates, and hopefully at a more accelerated rate than what they had previously indicated. But I think based on what happened last time with the RBA saying rates would not go up for at least 12 months, and then they went up dramatically not long after that statement, the RBA is being extremely cautious with any statements they make so that they don't get burnt on the downside again. So very, very mindful of what's going on there with the commentary, and trying through these videos to show you what the data is suggesting, and therefore what is the more likely scenario on interest rates based on the data that the RBA is looking at and wanting to see in order for them to continue the cut cycle. And so at the time of doing this, we hadn't seen the opposition's response to the budget. There is a very strong indication that they will look to introduce, as part of their election campaign, a different tax cut scenario. So it'll be interesting to see what that does and how that is responded to by the RBA. But at this point, $5.15 and $10.30 are the headline numbers. Those tax cuts are very, very minimal, and everybody gets them. And there we have it, the $150 energy rebate. And then there's a whole host of other things in this budget that haven't been getting as many headlines, one of which is the government's plan to continue with the introduction of an additional tax inside self-managed super funds for funds with assets greater than $3 million, and they want to start taxing unrealised gains. So at the moment, we only pay tax on our gains when we sell our assets, whether that's properties or stocks or other capital producing assets. And the intention is to tax that at an additional 15% on the unrealised gains for people with a super balance greater than $3 million. That is not getting the headlines, but it is in there, and it is a very, very, I think, cynical tax. It's not necessary to hit those unrealised gains, given we don't know what's going to happen if those gains don't materialise. Do we get a rebate for the tax that we paid on gains that are no longer there? It just seems a very silly way to go about it. So in terms of the current budget, as I said from the outset, an absolute nothing burger, because it is right before an election campaign. They wanted to do nothing to upset the population, and nothing overly expansive that could potentially have impeded the RBA from passing on tax cuts. So they've kept it very, very lame. And so in terms of your money management, your wealth creation, we just continue on our merry way. And a really good example of how we can see a whole host of noise in the media about all these different types of things. And then ultimately, when you get to the bottom of it all, there's just nothing there. And so we carry on. We all get our $5 or $10 per week tax cuts throughout the next year or two, subject to whoever wins the election. And we'll just carry on with life. We'll carry on with managing our money. We'll carry on with growing our wealth, and let all the other noise continue down the path. Ultimately, what is good about this budget so far is that it will not necessarily impact the interest rate decisions of the RBA, and therefore we're a good chance of seeing another cut in the not too distant future, based on all the other data that we've been seeing for the last few months, which is really good. So that's Woody's Weekly Wisdom, episode number 89. As per normal, if you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the little bell to get notified when they come out. If you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, give us a thumbs up, share, comment, like, do all of those things. Helps us grow the exposure of these videos so that more people get to understand what's going on in the markets, so they can make better money decisions just like you. And I will see you again next week for another Woody's Weekly Wisdom. Cheers.